So, with the 4th anniversary of Arknights come and gone, and the next Trials of Navigator here giving us the experience of the Arknights boss rush game mode, it made me realize that we have 4 years worth of bosses in Arknights. So, to distract me from the fact that I've been playing this game for 4 years, and my crippling chronophobia, I started asking myself, which one of these bosses is the hardest really? Which boss did people think was the hardest to come out at the time, and how hard actually were they? Now, to make it fair on the older bosses, and to make it more interesting, I only considered how hard they were as they first came out, because there are certainly some new operators that completely trivialized the old bosses. So when evaluating how hard a boss was, I won't consider any operator that came out after their event. Boss would be judged on their most difficult stage. And yes, the difficulty of the stage would also be put to consideration, since a difficult stage should naturally make the boss harder, and the boss would of course make the stage harder. But I won't consider any stages from CC or IS or anything similar. And lastly, I'm assuming casual play. Not everyone can 4-star clear every stage like Silvergun can. Well, without further ado, the first boss I'd like to talk about is Patriot. Now, believe it or not, Patriot wasn't always the bully victim he is now. He used to be an actual threat back in the day. You couldn't just Surtur it. And nowadays, there's Moinar that can solo Patriot's first phase. And Typhon too. And Ray, holy shit, how many operators can do it now? H7-4 is, of course, the hardest stage Patriot is in, and this stage was very intimidating, especially if you consider that the selection of operators looked like this. Now, everyone nowadays knows how to easily beat Patriot, even without the crazy DPS characters, and that's with buffers and debuffers. But if you put in the context of the understanding of the game back then, people usually never bring along these types of operators, since the mindset is, instead of bringing a buffer or debuffer, just bring another operator that does damage. Sure, there was the Exu Warf combo and AK, but people usually think of them as a meme or not really viable. Patriot was the first boss that you would actually need to think otherwise. H7-4 is a difficult stage, the claw enemies being especially dangerous here. Now, is Patriot the hardest boss in Arknights? No, definitely not. I think even Frostnova's stage H6-4 was harder when that first came out. If you had all the tools necessary, even back when he first came out, this stage was not difficult casually if you had the correct operators built, which in this video I will be assuming. But I needed to put Patriot here because of the initial impact and the seemingly insurmountable defense and resistance he had. It changed the way the community viewed buffers and debuffers. But for now, we'll move on from Patriot and go to Mudrock. Now, Mudrock is a boss that gives me war flashbacks. I was a relatively new player back when Twilight of Walamon first came out, and WDEXCM had everything. These ranged guys that hurt and hit multiple operators, the Mudrock golems of course, and these guys. These exploding guys honestly make this entire stage so much harder. They make Mudrock so much harder to deal with, since not only do they deal a lot of damage and explode upon death, but that explosion also makes nearby gramophones hostile, which, if Mudrock is near one, slowly restores her health. Hostile gramophones are extremely dangerous here, and it is exceedingly difficult to keep them from being hostile. They extend Mudrock's life, which she already extends by the shield she gives herself. Having Mudrock last a long time isn't a good idea either, as each attack she does, she increases her attack by 60%, which then stacks 6 times, for a total of 360% bonus attack. That's 4,600 damage per swing. What holds her back from me considering her to be the hardest boss is the fact that she only has one phase, which makes her so much more manageable since you only need to pour out all your damage once, which if you had Suzerain, Eafiala, and Kyobi, which I am assuming, even though I myself didn't have Ea or Kyobi at the time, she should be fairly easy. Up next is Blood Knight. Now, Blood Knight is quite a simple boss on the surface. He does physical damage, takes less damage from operators not blocking him. He also has a global range stun, which does arts damage per second. With his impressive attack stat, which further increases by 50% in phase 2, it would be difficult for any DPS operator to ignore that damage reduction. Unless, of course, you're Surtur. His phase 2 being significantly more difficult in the first place, making him have range on his attack, and now he has even more damage reduction to operators not blocking him, but none of these are the reason why he's so difficult. You see, in his phase transition, he spawns these blood blades. If these things reach the Blood Knight's location, he heals for about 10% of his HP. If he heals enough during his phase transition, he will repeat his phase 1. This can last indefinitely. Now normally, the Bloodblades aren't so bad to deal with. They're more of a nuisance really. But in NLEX 8, the challenge mode condition makes these fucking things immortal. Not only that, but they hit way too hard. This is the real difficulty of the boss. He spawns about 1 billion of them in the phase transition, so make sure they don't reach him, because if enough do, he'll repeat his phase 1. And just when you think it's over, he still spawns the blades periodically in his phase 2. This guy and his blades were brutal when he first came out. If you didn't have enough DPS to kill him near where he spawns, you'll have to deal with the brutality of the blood blades, or use Weedy to push them away, to make sure he doesn't repeat his phase 1. If you had all these tools, you'd still have a hard time with this guy casually, so he's definitely a contender for the hardest boss at the time of his release. But here, have Ebonholds one-shotting both of his phases. Okay, so I feel like I've been talking way too much on each boss, so I'll speedrun these next few since I don't think any of them are harder than good old Blood Knight here. Next up on the list is the End Speaker. Come on guys, the End Speaker isn't that hard. The hardest thing about this boss is reading all the damn things he can do. Don't worry, I've been there. When Stultifer Navis first came out, I thought this was the hardest event in the game because of this damn boss. But then I understood what the boss actually does. Then it became a pushover. The regular enemies in the stage are just as easy, the boss itself is easy, you just need to know what you're doing. Next up is Emperor's Blade. Now, Emperor's Blade was quite a nightmare back when he first came out, but looking back at it now, the stage is all about the management of where the boss puts down his fart clouds. You just can't let him fart near the center, so it becomes a matter of baiting the fart to be put down in certain places so that it doesn't mess up your defenses. You can apply the same logic to Anduin actually. Neither of these bosses are that difficult once you keep all that in mind. Next up is the Last Steam Knight. Now this is a boss where casually there is no way to easily counter him like the past two bosses. He is just a boss with monstrous stats on a really difficult stage. H11-4 is a shitstorm. I can't believe a dog outside CC can be this scary. The tree guys are also super scary, not to mention the Sarkaz Devourers and Sarkaz Wither Tanks that come with this stage. Funnily enough, Texas Altar from the very next event would make this stage significantly easier than it was. It can chunk down the boss and it can take care of the tree guys early. But alas, we didn't have her. So this stage becomes a desperate struggle for space as the boss slowly makes the entire map undeployable. There's honestly not a lot of things I can say about this stage. It's very simply understandable how this stage is hard. But I don't think this was the hardest stage, even when it first came out. For me, Blood Knight's stage is still the hardest in my opinion. But of course I think this is the hardest boss. I mean, there's a reason why so many thumbnails say insert niche squad here versus the hardest stage. H12-4 is absolutely brutal. The condition basically making the cluster almost instantaneously activate Corrosion Fallout, making your operators reach 0 defense in record time. The thing also periodically nukes all your operators in a cross area, exploding all your operators if they're adjacent to each other. This is definitely the boss with the most amount of invulnerability time in all of Arknights, an unreasonable amount of HP, and has physical and arts damage reduction. The cluster cannot be blitzed down and will last a very long time on the field regardless of what you do. You cannot just burst it down with Muinar because of all the invulnerability time. Not to mention all the enemies in this stage, the civilians, the guys that reduce DP with each attack, the monoliths, a lot of the fucking top hat guys who are already very scary enemies on their own, let alone if your operators have 0 defense thanks to the cluster, and all this while having the chapter 12 mechanic of a reduced DP cap. This stage is a nightmare to do casually. I would even say that this stage is even harder to do than some Risk 18s from CCs that we had to do. It always impresses me so much when people do niche nights clears of this, because it must have taken hours upon hours of theory crafting and attempts, and I have nothing but respect for them. I mean, I even had to cheat for the footage that you're seeing here. I brought a altar. She didn't come out until way after Chapter 12 had finished. So yeah, unsurprisingly, I believe the Damazdi cluster is the hardest boss in Arknights we've had so far. Now, I obviously skipped over a few notable bosses, like Manfred, Dolly, and the Ursus civilians, but regardless, I still don't think they're nearly as difficult as the cluster. There are also some bosses that are coming up that are quite difficult. I've heard rumors that the Sanguinarch might be as hard or even harder than the cluster, but that's for another time. For now, thank you for watching this video. Bye bye!